Okay, so as I mentioned a few Sundays now, I'm doing this Advent series that is derived from Facebook. Well, and the Bible, but initially from Facebook. And as I've said in a couple of these, in a way, and this sermon is not for you, in the sense that I wanted to know and wanted to hear what people who are atheists or non-believers, non-Christians would want to hear if they were dragged to church on a Sunday, and what they would want the pastor to address, what they want the preacher to talk about. And so I culled that from that Facebook post, and I came up with these were the things that people mentioned. Now, of course, I only had 3 Advent sermons. Pierce took one graciously, and I had 3 Advent sermons to do, so I couldn't address all these. Nobody could in that brief amount of time. Although interestingly, the sermon Pierce gave spoke to some of these things. And we don't plan that. We don't plan anything. So if anything happens that works, it's an accident. So I did in the previous 3 sermons, or 2 sermons rather, racism and anti-Semitism and poverty are the ones that I addressed. And of course, running out of time, I jumped right to the bottom. What is the purpose of life?
I have a question real quick.
Is it about any of those up there? Or?
Yeah, it's about the Advent. All of them are on the YouTube? All
These questions?
No,
or,
Advent week.
Oh, all the Advent sermons, they are. Yes, they're all on there. Yep.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's a good question. So, yeah, I just went whole hog, as it were, and decided to take the bull by the horns and all those other metaphors and just jump right into the deepest part of the pool here. That was like 4 metaphors in a row. How to speak like a pastor. What is the purpose of life? That was what I went for. I'm going to give it to you in 20 minutes or less. But I'm speaking largely to, well, to the camera in a sense. I hope that this is edifying for everybody here and encouraging. But I want to speak to people who are watching this out there in the digital world who would come to church and say, what is the meaning of life? And the reason this was such an interesting question on the Facebook post, and I think it was posted by my uncle Roger, who lives out in Bellingham, Washington, near Seattle, who's an atheist, and he posted this question. If you accept the premise that we have a purpose, are different somehow, as some atheists and agnostics do, then what is that purpose? Now, I really like the way that question was framed, because it makes us think like an atheist, or like if you did not believe in God, didn't believe in Jesus, you had no faith at all, and so you wanted to just, then what would be your purpose in life? What would be the meaning of life? What would be your point? And that was a helpful exercise for me to kind of, put the shoe on the other foot and say, okay, I have no faith. I don't believe in God. Jesus is just another man who was killed by the Romans 2,000 years ago. Where would I find my meaning? Where would I find my purpose? And really think about it. I mean, really not try to give trite, simple answers, but what would I do with myself? And of course, we can't know that fully. We can't know how our lives would have unfolded, but I tried to imagine as best I could if I just suddenly lost my faith one morning, and how would I move forward? I think that's an important exercise for us as Christians, especially if you've been a Christian for a very long time, to just an exercise in empathy. What's it like to not, because we get so used to walking with our Lord, right? I mean, it becomes just part of your life, and you kind of forget. Just like we all forget what it's like to be teenagers, except teenagers.
Some of us want to forget.
You can share later about that if you'd like. We'll turn the camera off. But I thought that was a good question. And, spoiler alert, I just thought I'd jump right into, before I talked about that some more. For me, as a man of faith, as a Christian, these 2 passages, to some degree, entail the purpose I have in life. Jeremiah 29:11, the famous passage, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." And so for me, part of the purpose is that I have a hope and a future from the Lord. Or put in a different way, Paul writing in Romans 8, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." I put a lot of faith in that God has called me according to his purpose. So there's a purpose that I'm fulfilling in walking with the Lord, and that all things will work together for good, which means I can't mess it up, which is an important part for me as a Christian of having a purpose, because it'd be much more frightening to walk with the Lord and think, well, if I mess it up badly enough, then there's no salvation, there's no hope for me. That's a much scarier place to be. In which case, I'd probably almost rather be an atheist and walk with the Lord. But this tells me that the good news is that he'll work all things out for good, because I'm walking with his purpose. He has his purposes for me. I could do whole sermons on that and have, but I'm going to move on from that. So that's where I'm coming from. That's who I am. That's my heart. That's the heart, I would like to think, of all people who call themselves followers of Jesus. But it is a good question that if we did not have this purpose, then what would our purpose be? And again, like I said in previous sermons, I want to be fair to my non-believing friends and family, people I love dearly. I don't want to caricature them. I don't want to make them out to be stupid or foolish or anything like this. I want to give them... So I looked up online and did some thinking about what do atheists believe their purpose in life is. People who reflect on this or post it online or do interviews or what have you, people who talk about the atheist purpose, the atheist meaning in life. Found out a lot of things. Of course, I can't go through it all here, take way too long, but I picked out what I thought were some of the most prominent ones. One of the first things was an interview with Richard Dawkins, who's, as you know, a famous English atheist. He's written a lot of anti-theist books. And I've got this quote here. I'll read the quote in full here. This is the first part and the second part. So this is Richard Dawkins speaking. "We are here only to pass on our genes. This seems to be the purpose of our lives. But can this really be the only purpose of human existence? I don't think so. Darwin's remarkable theory, the theory of evolution, offers a second meaning of the word purpose. It's an inspiring one, which accords more fully with our own view of our better selves. It stems from the curious observation that we humans appear to be breaking Darwin's rules." So what he said so far there is that we don't seem to be acting just as evolutionarily derived beings. Dawkins goes on. "Evolution may explain how we came into the world, but it doesn't shed much light on how we lead our lives today." I'm going to read that sentence again, it's key. "Evolution may explain how we came into the world, but it doesn't shed much light on how we lead our lives today. Most of our energy today goes into projects that seem to have nothing to do with the goals of survival or reproduction. We neither feel nor act like we are driven by evolutionary compulsion." In other words, we don't act like just propagating the species is the only thing that's important. In fact, if we met somebody like that, we'd have some choice words for them. "We seem to have freed ourselves from the need to spend all our time propagating our selfish genes. We have many other goals that take our time and energy. We explore the world around us. We create objects for their aesthetic beauty. We pursue hobbies for the sake of fun. And when we have sex, we defy our genes with contraception. I personally am delighted that our brains have given us the freedom to defy our genes. The unrefined world of natural selection is not the sort of world I want to live in." So Dawkins is saying here that the purpose of life, from an atheistic point of view, from his point of view, is to enjoy the world. I'm paraphrasing here, but things like beauty, adventure, fun. He mentions the joy of sex, without responsibility. He's been married 3 times. I don't judge. Maybe he's got himself in trouble with that one. I don't know. But he does, it's something we can relate to, is my point. I don't think we read this up there and think, what is he, crazy? Okay, so because the world offers certain pleasures, right? I mean, the world offers things that we look at, all humans together, and say, that's a beautiful thing. That's a transcendent thing. The love that exists between us. Paintings, music, things that Dawkins is right, doesn't have much to do necessarily with propagating the species. So, then I went, so I read that and was thinking about that, and I went and I tried to find, looking at various places online like Quora or Reddit, these websites where theists and atheists debate or talk or chat. I tried to steer away from the more angry, vitriolic, nasty things, and just to people who seem to be having just a conversation, which is harder to find than you might think. I don't know who all these people are with keyboards who think they're going to draw people to Christ by yelling at them, but that's a different issue. Anyway, so these are a few quotes from just sort of random people online, but atheists who seem to not be angry, but just espousing what their views were. So 1, life has one purpose only, the seeking of available energy. That is all, nothing else. There never was and never will be anything else. And if you don't understand that, you won't understand anything in this life. So just saying, all life is just exchange of energy. It's a physical world, atoms bumping into each other. That's it. This other fellow, there's no meaning to life unless you make one out of it. Life is just process that helps balance out the vast energies of this infinite universe. So again, this notion of just energies, that's all we are, just a body of energy. This one person, after speaking about evolution, said, everything else we do is just distraction, but it's distraction for good. So art, music, science, and all is there to attract mates and improve the chances of reproduction. They say that artists have twice as many partners than regular men. That's why art evolved, because it was good at attracting females. I included that one because I thought that was kind of funny. And also, if you're a female artist reading that, you're like, well, then what am I doing? But in a serious note, it is interesting to me, and a lot of those posts and a lot of what people write about is that reproduction and sex take on a very heightened importance often, I feel, in the atheist world. When they talk about purpose and meaning of life, that is the highest human experience. For me and for many of you, our highest human experience is intimacy with God and worship. It's the most transcendent and most beautiful, the thing we yearn for the most. But of course, if you don't have that, what's the next step down is going to be an experience between two people. So it makes sense that sexuality and reproduction and these things would be held up to this kind of high standard, this high level. And then this one, I'll end with this one. For me, the major difference between the religious and the atheistic concepts of purpose is that the atheistic position leaves the specifics of individual purpose up to us. In other words, I get to decide what my purpose is. We get to decide what's important to us. Atheism contains no demands nor consensus on purpose, nor does it enforce any universal meaning. There is no atheistic existential reason for human existence. So he's just saying there's nothing that ties us all together. We choose our purpose. So pulling all those together, these are kind of the 4 main points that I kind of came up with for atheistic purpose in life. And I hope I'm being fair. I'm trying to be fair. I'm not trying to be polemical. 1, there can be no overarching existing purpose that we all share, because that would be evidence of God. In other words, if we all shared a purpose that was given to us, as it were, it would be, in some sense, evidence of a divinely given purpose. The brutal... How did it change all to ones? I checked that.
They're all important.
Something about that computer. I'm going to have words with that computer after the service. Number 1, the brutal reality of life is that it is at heart without a point. The brutal reality of life is that life has no point, no meaning, at heart. Number 3, however, on this earth, we've evolved to pass on our genes, so while we have no purpose, our most strong function is to procreate. If you were to say a purpose, it would be to procreate. That would be the strongest one we have. Number 4, but it's best not to live by that purpose, even though that is our strongest purpose, but instead to pick, personally, a better purpose that benefits others as well and is more altruistic. So this is the closest thing I can come to sort of a consensus, not that there is one, but a consensus that I could find, closest thing in the atheistic worldview, that we're basically, there is no larger meaning to life. However, we've evolved in such a way to have this purpose to pass on our genes, but we should live in a way that's more altruistic and better, doing things like loving each other, serving the poor, what have you, than what our narrative would indicate. So does that all make sense? I think that's fair. I hope that's fair. And I'm sure if on YouTube and places someone thinks that's not fair, I'll hear about it. But I think that's a fair estimation of the atheistic purpose. And so really the best you can do, and this relates to Pierce's sermon last week, is just to enjoy the life that you have before you die and no longer exist anymore. I think that's what you can do. We have a passage for that. If the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. And I think that's the best I could do if I was an atheist, which is to enjoy myself. And enjoying yourself, by the way, doesn't necessarily, it's not just a hedonistic kind of party on, dude. You can feel good about and take great pleasure in helping others. I mean, there's something for the altruistic. There are atheists, agnostics who do good things for people because it makes them feel good about themselves and they think they're doing something important, which they are. To help others is always good in the eyes of God. But there is a sense, though, in which, well, it's just about kind of my purpose that I've picked, which makes me feel good. And, enjoying myself. So that could look many different ways. But speaking for myself, and I know this about me, I wouldn't live a particularly altruistic life, at least the trajectory I was headed on anyway, before I found the Lord. I think I would have picked a more selfish life. I mean, I wouldn't have tried to hurt people. I would have tried to have been fair and all the things. My mom raised me to be a good boy, but I would have wanted my happiness, and that would have been my goal. I would have wanted the things that I want that brought me the greatest enjoyment emotionally, sexually, in terms of success, however I would have defined that those would have been my highest goals. And that's me. Other atheists may choose different avenues of meaning. And that's the thing. Any avenue of meaning or any purpose is really open to you as an atheist, because ultimately there is no ultimate purpose. You pick. So to follow God, so now we've got the left and the right hand here. So to follow God is a narrow path. In fact, the Bible's very explicit about that. Stray too far to the left or too far to the right, and you'll find yourself lost in the wilderness. Enter through the narrow gate. Wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction. The gate is small, the gate is narrow, but it leads to life. This is the Christian narrative. This is Christ. This is the cross on the wall there, the narrow gate. And it may be narrow, but it leads somewhere. It's going somewhere. Whereas atheism, it seems to me, offers many paths, a nearly infinite number of paths. You can choose to go anywhere at any time in terms of purpose. Your purpose can be to collect spoons. You can pick any purpose. One is as good as another. Anything you want it to be. And therefore, it feels a bit like nothing. The sermon series for Advent this year I entitled The Hope You're Waiting For. And so I want to speak directly then, if that is a fair estimation, I want to talk about the hope you're waiting for. And I want to say to you what someone said to me, not in so many words, but more or less what someone said to me when I was a young man. And it's this, that your intuition, your sense, your suspicion that life has a purpose, because as that question indicated from Facebook, people want their life to have a purpose. Your suspicion that life has a purpose, that you are not just a random collection of cells, that things like morality and evil are real, that have existential reality, that the stars do reflect the power and immensity of their creator. All these feelings that you have are not based on lies or fantasies or made-up things. They're not mistakes in the evolutionary process. They are true. You can take those feelings that we all have as humans and take them to the bank and say, God, I believe in you. I believe you created me and the stars, and I believe you have a purpose for me. And I'm here to listen. I'm here to listen. That answer to that question is there a purpose, is yes. And you shouldn't live. I pray you won't live with surface meaning, trying to find meaning, ultimate meaning, in the vanities, again, that Pierce spoke about last week. And the vanities can be very good in and of themselves. They can be blessings from God. But you shouldn't try and find your meaning there, in your relationships or your work, your productivity, your exercise, your books, your movies, whatever it is. You shouldn't find your worth there. None of those things are bad in and of themselves, but they can't give you purpose. And God alone can provide that. I believe that with all my heart. And it makes sense. I mean, from a scientific point of view, if there is a creator who created all of us, then the only place we could find our true worth is in the one who created us. It's a A plus B equals C proposition. And I'm here to testify that God is real. If you're an atheist, you're likely to say that you find your purpose, as I said before, in life from any number of things. Doing well at work, loving your children, helping others, something positive, I hope.
It's impossible.
But you don't need God, you say. The various works of my life give me purpose every day, and I find them to be good. And I'm sure that you as an atheist do find them to be good. But I hope that's not enough for you. At least I don't believe that's enough for you. I honestly don't believe that you find the fullness of joy and the solidity of hope from these things. I don't believe that you cry tears of joy when you consider the fullness of what you have and what you've experienced and what is to come, and that you feel that your heart might burst from gratitude and wonder when you consider your life. Maybe you do. I don't know. I'd be surprised. I've only found those feelings in the presence of my Lord. I would guess that you're living on breadcrumbs of joy and half-starved. And you might say, well, at least I have these breadcrumbs. I'm not living in a fantasy world. But I would say you're parched and thirsty, and you only allow yourself drops of water every day. And you may try to convince yourself that that's all the water there is to drink. But I would say to you that there's a well from which you can drink and never be thirsty again. And I believe that if you allow yourself to taste from this well, you'll find that God is real and He is good. God is real and He is good. But you have to crack that door open a little bit to let the light in. You don't have to throw it wide, just crack it a little bit to let a little light in. Take a chance. That would be my challenge. Allow yourself to imagine, even as I imagined through this past week, what it would be like if God wasn't real in my life. What if I had no faith? Try to imagine yourself if God was real in your life. Throw up a prayer, tentatively. Just say, God, if you're listening, then I'm going to listen a little bit too. I'll open my ear just a little bit and say this prayer and see what happens. And keep your eyes open. Let a little light in. And I want you to think that what if these words you're hearing right now is the call to open your heart that little bit? And what if you're dying a little bit every day when you could be growing a little more alive every day? So it's Christmas time. Christmas has become over-commercialized and saturated with money and greed. I don't think any of you would dispute that. So, speaking to the atheists out there, we know. We also find it upsetting. But there remains, nevertheless, I think a common recognition, some seed of recognition, that there is something about the celebration of this birth that has to do with hope for the future, the hope that you're waiting for. And I've come to believe that everyone who knows a little bit about the Christ story, about the birth of Jesus, recognizes there's something holy and beautiful in that moment, even if they don't believe. And there's many stories that I could tell about that. This one just came across my desk just recently, and it struck me, and so I thought I'd share it with you, with regard to hope, with regard to atheism, and with regard to what we can recognize. Oh, that's right. Gloria Baker and Noel Regney. Who knows those names? I didn't either before this week, so fair enough. Interesting people in of themselves. Noel Regney was a Frenchman, but he was impressed. He was a Frenchman who spoke German in the Alsace-Lorraine area, and he was impressed into the Nazi army and worked as a double agent for the French resistance. Incredible story. He was raised Catholic, but became an atheist, became a non-believer. He married a woman by the name of Gloria Baker, who was a Jewish woman. I couldn't find out much about her faith, if she was I'm guessing from little bits and pieces here and there that she was probably a secular Jewish woman, a non-believer, agnostic or atheistic or what have you. I don't think she was Orthodox or Reformed, but she was raised in a Jewish household. And they got married and they lived in New York. And it was October of 1962. Does anybody know what was happening in October of 1962?
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Cuban Missile Crisis, that's right. So that was, I wasn't around then, I can't speak to it, but I understand, and it makes sense to me that was a time of heightened tension and fear all throughout the closest we ever came to nuclear war. Both Russia and the United States eye to eye, and at first neither willing to blink. So I imagine it was terrifying. And Noel Regney and Gloria noticed, walking down the streets of New York and whatnot, the fear in people's eyes and the muted sense of what was going on. I mean, just it was on everybody's heart and mind. They were a singer-songwriter pair, and they were approached by a producer, a man who wanted them to write a Christmas carol, which they had never done before. They're not Christians, and they didn't write worship music or Christmas music, generally speaking. So at first they demurred and said, no, we're not going to write a Christmas carol. But Noel was walking down the street during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he saw two babies in strollers. There were two mothers next to each other, and the babies were looking at each other and laughing and having a great time. And this phrase popped into his head, "Said the night wind to the little lamb." And he thought, oh, that's interesting. Well, his wife was having an experience too, that while she was walking around New York on the same day, or the same week anyway, close to the same time, she couldn't get this melody out of her head. It was in trumpets. She kept hearing trumpets in her mind of this melody over and over and over and over again. She just couldn't get out of her head. And when they came together at their apartment, they found that the lyrics fit the melody. And they started to write, "Do you hear what I hear? Said the night wind to the little..." And they wrote it as a plea, as a call for peace in the world, using the birth of Jesus Christ as the theme. They wrote a Christmas carol, unintentionally. And interesting, in an interview with Gloria Baker, they said that they had a really hard time writing the song because they would get one or two verses into it, and one of them would burst into tears. They really couldn't finish the song because they found it so moving, so powerful. And they submitted the song, and it was an immediate hit. It started being recorded by various artists. I think the most famous one was Bing Crosby, but there were a number of them, and it became a huge hit. And I think sometimes about these two atheists or agnostics sitting there in their apartment singing a song about Jesus that they had just accidentally written, crying, because of the words about the Christ child, that he's come to bring peace. He's come. We're going to sing it in a minute here. Let me get the... Said the king to the people everywhere, listen to what I say. Pray for peace, people everywhere. Listen to what I say. The child sleeping in the night, he will bring us goodness and light. He will bring us goodness and light. And it's a beautiful line. It's a beautiful sentiment, and I could see why they were crying during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think of the time in World War I, and I preached on this a year or two ago, when the war almost came to a halt on Christmas Eve because the soldiers started fraternizing because they were singing Christmas carols. And that problem was so severe, it went up to the top of the chain of command, the generals. They were worried that the war would end in those parts of the front because they didn't want to kill each other anymore. That's a real problem. If we don't want to kill each other anymore and the war's going on, what do we do? So the next year they specifically ordered a bloody shelling and attacks on Christmas Eve so that there would be specific reason to kill each other on that time. That's the power of Christ, that it might scare us for the peace that it might accidentally bring. And so that's why I would say to my atheist friends and family that there is an element that I can't explain, and there's an element of coming to the Lord that is simply your heart meeting God's heart, that my words can't affect and my words can't enable. But I hope that just like that songwriting duo back in 1962, that you can just see for a second that this really is, I know it's an overused phrase, but it really is the greatest story ever told, that God would come and forgive us and save us and show us what true peace looks like. I've not found anything better. So what is the purpose? Well, I already gave you my spoiler, and then you know the purpose I have is God's purpose in my life. But we look at the birth of Jesus and we see all the competing purposes around him. It was the purpose of King Herod to stay in power. And so when he felt threatened, he did like many kings do, he killed. He killed all the 2-year-old boys around that area. We know from history that he was not shy about killing his wives and his own son. Why would he care about killing random people near the Bethlehem area? That was the purpose of King Herod. It's a natural purpose for kings to kill to stay in power. Seems normal. I don't think my heart is any different. I don't think I'm a better person than King Herod. I think if I lived in that time and had those influences and grew up in that way, I'd be just as murderous. I don't think I'm a better person. But at the same time, God is fulfilling his purposes. And Christ came with the purpose to save us. And I'm going to give my purpose to him and hand over my will to his, because that's a far better purpose than anything I have in mind. So my prayer for you watching, and my prayer for you as a community and as a church, is that we hold tight to the purpose that God has for us. Let's pray.